Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Roger Humphrey. In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome back guitarist, educator, Brad DeRoche. Please join us as we discuss his new recording project, his work as a reviewer of new music, and much, much more. Before we begin, please take this opportunity to subscribe or follow. It's an easy thing to do, and it really helps the channel a lot. Thank you. So I'm welcoming to the show Brad DeRoche, an old friend. This is your third trip back here, first time on video. Welcome home.
Yeah, well, thank you. Always happy to be here, especially in video form.
Well, the whole thing is the format is expanding and being refined. So I appreciate you being willing to help me test fly this beast
Yeah,
and
always.
and see what's going on. So I got a few things that I want to talk about. Number one, let everybody know that you have a wonderful CD, and
There it is.
and I really enjoy it.
Good.
I guess my first question is, well, number one, sales okay on that? You doing okay?
Yeah. I think I should get some tracking information sometime soon. It seems like it's February, I think is when they send out numbers. And, I honestly don't know how many it sold in terms of CD product or streams. I know it gets streamed on all the different streaming platforms too. But I don't keep track of that myself. The record label does. And then they send me an update once a year, and I don't know. It's not much. I mean, it's certainly not. I don't think I'm quite at the level of Taylor Swift with that recording. So, we count ours in the single digits, and she counts hers in the billions. But anyway, so yeah,
Well,
it's out there, and it gets some activity. It gets played on radio. I know I get a list from another company that tracks radio station plays, and it's been played all over the place. So not just locally, but around actually around the globe. So
that's wonderful. So
yeah,
the for those who don't know and are interested, of course, this is a lot of the beloved Spanish repertoire that we love to play on classical
yeah,
guitar. So
yeah.
my question to you about that is, how do you approach something like that? Because a lot of that stuff has been done so many times. Uh, and 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 I don't mean that to be snarky. I mean,
No,
I look at any violinist who plays the Mendelssohn, for example, or
yeah.
it's just how do you come at that and try to make your own mark?
Um, I guess I didn't think about it in terms of trying to make my own mark and trying to make it different than someone else's. Um, I don't, I guess in general, I don't approach art music that way. I know that what I do ultimately is going to sound like me, but I don't make an overt attempt to sound unique. So for me, the decision on that album was more in terms of what do people like to listen to when they think of a guitarist and a guitarist in this style, the classical style, let's say. And so I thought, well, these are pieces that I've either known or played in concert or think people like, and so that was the decision process in terms of what I put on the album. And then as far as how do I make it sound unique, I play them the best that I can. Let's say that, and that's kind of where that's where it is. So it's just me doing the best job I know how to do with music that I love and think people will like as well.
I know you've premiered music before. Is the approach to that a little different than it is to standard repertoire?
Uh, it isn't for me. Again, I look at what's there. I do my research too. I don't just simply start with a page and start learning notes. And I'm gonna let my dog in while we're talking here. So pardon me for 1 second. He's gonna scratch incessantly at the door otherwise. All right, mister. So now we're joined by We're joined by a dog. I don't know if he'll join the picture. You'll see his ears before you see anything else. He's a Frenchie. So um, anyway, as far as premiering new things, I've had the luxury of working with some composers in the past, and sometimes they will tell you, here's what I want out of this piece, here's what I'm looking for. And so then you follow that. But I think, again, the process is kind of the same. I look at the score and I try to interpret it the best that I can, and play it in a way that's the best that I can also. And how that comes out, it'll be different than everybody else's, because as you know, we all have a slightly different take on what we think the music on the notes on the page are trying to tell us. And
Yeah,
that's
my feeling is that a lot of times for me, it's just I play and the music just kind of comes out of me, and what I end up with is what I end up with.
yeah, yeah.
But I never considered myself much of an authority in that, not
Well,
like you or some others. So
I don't think of myself in that way either. I think when I was younger, I wanted to be that. I thought, oh, I've got to be the guy that makes a recording or plays a piece in a way that everybody admires. But um, I think that every piece is open to its own interpretation, and no matter how hard you try, you can't really copy another person exactly.
right.
Everybody sounds different. And so I just finally got to the point where I thought, I just have to play this in a way that is the best that I can do, and that's all that I can do. I can't add anything else to it. I can't take it up 10 notches and be something that I'm not. Um, and one thing that I do more and more as time goes on is I do more research, I would say, at the front end of learning a piece. So the latest example for me would be the Bach cello suites. So instead of just going and taking another person's version and learning it and maybe altering a few things here and there, I mean, I started from scratch. I started with the first editions of the cello score. We're going back to the Anna Magdalena, uh, you know, handwritten scores and so on in the Kellner edition and whatnot. And I use all of that material plus a huge number of sources of written material, things, texts by other scholars and so on. And I put all that together, and then I start making my versions of the piece. And you can't do that with every single work, but because thankfully the Bach has tons of research. A lot of people have already done research on the pieces, but everybody's research goes in a different direction. And so what I'm trying to do, it's not exactly the same thing. So I take from all those different sources, and then I put that together and come up with what I like to think of as an informed performance. So I feel like I should know what I'm doing when I walk out on the stage. There's not much guesswork left in it. So
Now, you mentioned the Bach. Last time you and I spoke privately,
mhm.
you're working on a new CD
Yep,
of the. Now, is it going to be all of the cello suites or a couple of
all
the cello suites?
six. Yeah,
All
all six.
six.
Yeah, so I'm making my own arrangements of them. I'm through a good chunk of it now, and and the arrangements are they're harder than, well, let me back up. It's harder to do than I thought it would be, because even the notes that are strictly in the cello score are debatable, since we're dealing with actually five different early editions of this piece that were made by different copyists, including one early published edition that I'm looking at. And all of those put together, when you look at them, there are note discrepancies between them. Thankfully, as a guitarist, we don't have to worry about the bowings, because
Right.
the bowings are a huge source of discrepancy between the editions. But there are also notes and ornaments and other things that are different from one score to the next. So how do we then take that and say, this is the correct note that goes into that piece? That procedure alone takes a long time. And you finally just end up saying, okay, this is what I think is the best choice. And so that's what I end up with in the score. But then, in addition to that process, I feel personally that there's more to these individual works than meets the eye. We know for sure that Bach wrote his violin sonatas and partitas as what we might call a meaningful set, which means he conceived of them as a whole group of six with a particular arrangement that sort of made sense over time. And so it wasn't just a hodgepodge or collection of pieces that he wrote and was like, hey, here's six pieces I'm going to put together as a group. This was planned and he may not have written them all, one right after the other, but it was planned as a set. And there are a lot of reasons to believe that. Anyway, I believe that the cello suites are also a meaningful set, and they were planned, and that they may have some very overt religious designs in them. Something that we know was certainly true of Bach's life. He was a very devout Lutheran. But there are things that are in the score that make me believe that there's more than meets the eye. And so those are the things I'm also trying to understand. And when you get into that level of detail with them, you start to change your approach to them. So the way that I'm interpreting them now has been changing, and it's cool. I think it's for the better, but we'll see. So
Yeah, you get a chance to like tweak the details a little bit, and
yeah,
just
yeah,
yeah, I know that Bach at his death had two complete published collections of the writings of Martin Luther.
yeah, yeah. That was very important to him, and so what people have done is they've gone through those books, those writings of Luther, and they've looked at what Bach underlined and annotated in there, and then they can often see that, oh, he pulled that word out of this sentence and he used that in one of his cantatas in a very important way. And so there's relationship between that and his annotated versions of the Bible that he had, and other things that also inform my decisions in these cello suites. So
Yeah,
that is part of this whole research process.
I think it's marvelous. Now you're working on it now. Are you on some kind of a deadline with your label, or?
No, well, yeah, the deadline already passed, so unfortunately, but the recording's not done yet. So I'm getting close to making the first recording. So I'll do them three and three. So I'll do the first three first, and then 4, 5, and 6 afterward. And so that allows me to concentrate a little bit more on a smaller amount of work instead of trying to have all 6 in my head and hands simultaneously, which is a big task. Not impossible, but it's a lot of Bach to keep floating around in your head for a long time. And so anyway, yeah, 3 and 3 is the way I'm planning to do it, and I'm hoping that by March I'll have this first one done.
Now,
So
you did all of your own recording on the last project. Will you do that
yeah.
again?
Yes, yeah. I not that I don't want to have other people involved. It's just the easiest for me. Um, we're not in a big city here. It's harder to find people that have a similar vision, maybe around this area. And so, in terms of the kind of sound that I want, first off, I have the equipment for it now. I've over the course of years, I've purchased very good microphones and recording equipment, good converters, all of that stuff, very top shelf professional material. So I have the means to do it. And then as far as the recorded sound, I just kind of experimented with that over the years. Like, how far away do you put the microphones? And every room is different. And so I found a church in Midland, St. Bridget's Church, that sounds absolutely glorious. It's got very beautiful long reverb, which I like. And so I recorded that first CD there, and I'm planning to do the next ones there as well. So
So
yeah, I'll be doing it myself.
were you able to just use the room reverb, or did you have to add some in post-production?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I did this, I had the hope of having a completely original sound. So just the sound of my instrument going through the microphones onto a hard drive. And that's actually what you hear on that CD. There's no processing at all. So there's no added reverb, there's no EQ or compression or anything of the sort. It's really just the simple recorded sound. And I like that. I mean, I could probably tweak that some and, pull out some of the mids and make it more this or that, but I really just wanted it to be as close to natural as I could get. I know everything colors sound a little bit. All the microphones make a subtle difference in sound, etc. But again, I think the microphones might change the sound slightly. So do you correct that with a little EQ? I just thought, nah, I'm just going to make it plain and simple. And I like that.
Well,
And
I like the sound that you had on your CD. I like that a lot. I
oh,
thought that
good,
was very
good.
nice.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was, yeah, there was a clarity about it that I
Nice.
liked. And
Yeah.
so,
So it's as real as you can get, for better or for worser. Um, and yeah, so the process will be the same. I'll do one thing slightly different in the mastering process, which I don't do. That's the only part of the recording process I didn't take part in was mastering. And I had asked in the mastering process that they give me the maximum volume possible. And and he did exactly what I asked him. And so every piece was pushed up to the top of its maximum potential for volume so that when you listen to the CD, they're all going to spike at the same place. Well, what I didn't think about ahead of time is that my quiet pieces, which have a dynamic range of say here to here, my loud pieces have a dynamic range from here to here. What happens is that the quiet pieces end up here, so their peaks are the same, but the average volume of each note is higher. So the quiet pieces actually, in the sense on the CD, sound a bit louder by comparison than they do to the more dynamic pieces, which I didn't think about that until it was kind of, too late and I was just in a hurry to get it out. And I thought, it's close enough. And it's kind of hard to tell on different machinery where you play it back. So in some places it sounded pretty close to the same. And in other places you hear more disparity between them. So anyway, live and learn. So I'll fix that one the next time around.
well, when you're playing Spanish music, you can be very expressive, and you got a lot of elbow room.
Yeah.
With the Bach, maybe a little less so.
Yeah, I think certainly there won't be any Rasguiatos in the Bach, for instance. No hard strums, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think the dynamic range is going to be smaller from top to bottom in Bach than it is in a lot of the Spanish pieces, and so that won't be as big of an issue one way or the other, I think, with this record.
Cool. So,
Yeah,
um, I want to move on now
yeah,
to the Guitar Foundation of America, GFA.
yeah.
Uh, what is, you have a relationship with that organization? Can you kind of explain it real quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a member of that since the late '90s, and just as a member, you get the journal 4 times a year, and you can go to conventions and all that other stuff. Not that you couldn't if you weren't a member; you could also get all those things too. But I've supported the group for many years, and then oh, well, 5 or 6 years ago, I was at one of the conventions and I was talking with a few of the some other people who were there, and one of the guys happened to be on the board of trustees, and he asked me if I would like to be a part of the board of trustees, and I said, yeah, I would absolutely love it, and um, so anyway, that's how it was initiated, and then they have to propose to the other members of the board that you join, and then they take a vote on it and all this, and so you have to be voted on to the board, and I was, and so that was my first term, and then I received a vote to stay on for a second term, which is what I'm in now. And the board of trustees is a kind of a unique group of people. It's a combination of professional guitarists and also people who are good at bringing in funding for the organization, and they, because they need that, absolutely, to be able to run. It's a big organization and it requires funding, and so some of the board members are there kind of to bring in funding, and they're big business people, let's say. And so my role was kind of unique on the board, because as a former business owner with the Strings by Mail business that I had a sort of unique insight with the guitar community from that perspective. I've worked at vendors fairs numerous times for the GFA. I'm an educator and a performer, and so I've worn a number of different hats, and so I have a place that's a little different than most of them. And so I can see it from a number of different perspectives. And so I get put on different committees where we try to, help the group best that we can. And some of those are often related to the vendor's fair or soundboard. And so I've done some scholarly writing in the past, and so then I got stuck on that the last couple of go rounds, and so I became the soundboard connection to the board. And soundboard is the journal that the organization puts out, the quarterly journal. And so that's where that leads me probably to the next thing, which is this year I became the publication reviews editor for Soundboard. And that's a role completely separate from being on the board. And so what I do there is I actually accept new scores from different publishers around the globe. And then I review those and put them a written article in Soundboard. And so that helps people to know what's out there, what's new and what's exciting and so on.
That's kind of cool. So you're looking strictly at scores, not necessarily recordings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the recordings are a different category. And so that's a different person that does that. And so I'm looking at published works. And so then what will happen is I'll get just sort of randomly, people will send me things, companies rather. So Doberman Dawes, for instance, in Canada, Mel Bay from the United States, and other publishers will send new materials to me and ask for a review. And unfortunately, we get more material than we can review. So then it becomes a process of picking and choosing. And so that's where I come in as the reviews editor. I have to make decisions about what's going to get reviewed and put in the journal. So I'm the one that makes that choice. And also, I have to decide, what's going to get written about. So sometimes we'll get reviews from different people and they'll fall into maybe like in different categories. For instance, I might have one person that reviewed some method books, and then another person reviewed something on Baroque lute. And so then I'll think, okay, we've got these different reviews. I'm going to balance that out with these ones. So I kind of sit back and wait until the other writers send me things, which we have about 8 or 9 different writers for this. And so when they send me things, I look at it and say, okay, we've got this, this, and this. I think we should add this and this to balance out our reviews. And so there's some thought involved in what goes in there. And so I can't just review every single thing that comes in without thought. It's got to be balanced out.
So as we take a look at new music, how do you feel about this new stuff being written? Do you like it?
Some of it, yeah. It's really a wide spectrum of styles. Everything you can imagine. There's tonal music. There's completely bizarre, off the wall, modern sounding things, and everything in between. There's transcriptions of old pieces. So, it really does run the entire gamut of musical styles, what you get in. And this is just even in brand new compositions that really runs the gamut of style. I can't say that everybody's following like Leo Brouwer's style or something like that. It's really all over the board. Just thinking of some different things I got in, like one person wrote some pieces about California Native American musical culture. And so there was a set of pieces based on that. And I thought, oh, that would be very intriguing. It's Native American music. But when I played them, the pieces I thought about reviewing them, but I don't know, they didn't really stack up to be ones that I thought would be interesting enough for our readers to want to promote them. So probably have said more than I should say already about that. But, some things just, they work, and other things, they just sort of don't.
Do you play through just about everything that comes across your desk?
I haven't done everything. And here's one reason why, because not too long ago, I received a box of over 100 scores from Doberman Dawes. And right, so I could have spent the next 3 months just reading scores from Doberman Dawes and doing nothing else. And so once again, I kind of look at it and say, all right, here's what I've got. What kinds of things would fit into my review? And so I start pawing through, and some of them are transcriptions of Bach, for instance. And so one of the pieces that I got that was a Bach transcription. It was a work that I've not heard transcribed for guitar before. I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe I can write about it. So I was reading through it, and in one of the spots, and this is not an exaggeration, he actually asks for the performer to use their nose to hit a harmonic on the 12th fret. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that in a performance. So it's, even though I wanted to review the piece because I thought, it's something new, um, I chose not to because I would have to make a comment about that, because anybody that purchased that score would want to know that, oh gosh, he's going to want me to play a note, with a 12th fret with my, and the thing is, it wasn't necessary to do. There were other ways that you could have done it. Anyway, and so I didn't review that one, but then on the other hand, conversely, I found these pieces by a British female composer, Yvonne Bluer, that I found really delightful. And they're not particularly challenging pieces. They're kind of an intermediate level of difficulty, but they were just lovely. They reminded me a bit of some of the works of Debussy at times. And anyway, so I reviewed those instead, and I thought they were really quite beautiful. So
Gotcha.
again, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not everybody who is going to read that is going to be at virtuoso level of play. So
Right.
it's nice that you can reach out to them and have something that would be like me.
Yeah, well, most of our readership is that, how many people in the guitar world are elite virtuosos,
Yeah.
are we talking about 1 or 2% here? And so the other people, the other 98% are going to want something that's accessible to them. And so I want to review some of those pieces as well. I mean, there are certainly the really extreme pieces that we put in there, but so again, it's that balancing act. I want some things that are at a really high level. Other pieces are going to be more accessible. One of the things that I reviewed for the one that will be upcoming in a few months is a set of guitar music theory books. And I thought, oh, these, there's all this stuff is out there already. There's 1,000 guitar theory books, but this particular set of books seems very well thought out for the first year guitarist, and it's really well organized, and so that's something that I thought a lot of guitarists want to know more about theory. They want to understand, why is this thing called a treble clef, or why, how does it really function, and things like that. I mean, it's basic fundamentals of music, but it's something that a lot of guitarists don't have good grounding in. And so it's this collection, in my opinion, was much better than, say, the theory set by Aaron Shearer and some of the others that were written now decades ago. It's just more informed and up to date. So
I know that one of the problems that I had as a college teacher, and I'm sure you've run into this too, is we get guitar players who would come in who could play the dickens out of their instrument and were musically illiterate. They really had no, and you don't see that in any other instrument. You don't,
right.
possibly voice
Oh,
to
yeah,
some
yeah,
extent,
for sure. There, you would see it
but
with
but you
that's true.
don't see it in piano or violin or trombone. I mean, they all,
Right.
they all have a good grounding in theory, and guitar players not so much so. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, because a lot of us are self-taught, uh, which is a good and a bad thing. I think the good part about that is that many of us pick up the instrument simply because we really like it, and we like what it sounds like, and we enjoy playing it. And so we carry on doing that until we end up with some ability, and then all of a sudden we realize, hey, I'm good enough to do X, Y, and Z, but I really don't know how to read music. And so I think a lot of guitarists end up in that position. It could be changing slowly. I think just because there's so many materials out there now, compared to, for instance, when you and I were starting, there were literally about zero materials for us to learn from, or teachers or other players, or recordings even. It was scarce, and and so yeah, that part is still the guitarists are. I think all plucked string instruments, if you look back historically, have unfortunately been set aside on kind of on their own island for the most part. We don't blend into other ensembles well. We have our own, approach to pedagogy, and composers don't know how to write for plucked string instruments, etc. We've just sat on the sidelines for a long time, and it's become much much more mainstream, even in the last couple of decades. A lot of strides have been made to bring it into the university level of education and so on. But yeah, still work to do for sure.
So, what is your feeling about the future of this instrument and the new music and so on and so forth? You feel pretty good about it?
I do. Yeah, yeah. Um, I think I can look at it from both a personal approach and also from a more universal standpoint. And I think universally, we have to admit that the guitarists are better and better all the time. And that's true of other instruments as well, though. Um, and a simple example would be if you looked at the greatest pianists in the late 1700s, a person like Mozart, for instance, who is widely considered one of the finest pianists in all of Europe. His hardest pieces that he performed and wrote are being played, by college freshmen all the time. I mean, this is not the hardest material in the repertoire. So to be the greatest virtuoso on the planet in 1782, and you bring it up to 2024, you wouldn't even compare to, the typical college student now, let alone the greatest virtuosi. And so the instrument globally has grown the same way for guitar. What I look at now, the performers that are playing now and the ability they have now really eclipses, at least technically, anything that was done 100 years ago. Segovia's greatest accomplishment in many ways was the chaconne that he recorded and performed, and starting in, I believe, in 1924, so exactly 100 years ago, when he premiered it in Paris. And when we look at that, I mean, we have 12-year-old kids that play that all the time now and play it really well. So, that was the greatest accomplishment in the world, and it made headlines around the globe. Yet today it's fairly common fare for guitarists to play, and by no means the hardest piece. There are many pieces that are much more difficult than that. So from that perspective, I would say that we've advanced, both technically and musically. But on the other hand, I think the individual artistry has become much more homogenized. And so most of our guitars, I feel like, coming out now sound much more like each other. And I think the reason for that is probably because of things like the internet and YouTube. They hear all these other guitarists, and so that's what gets plugged into their brain. And so when they hear the chaconne, they hear it sounding like this example that they've heard, and there's maybe 20 different people playing it, but they all kind of are learning from the same model, and so they all more or less sound the same. And so I think that's one thing. It's becoming more homogenized, perhaps, and less unique and individual. Like, I mean, Segovia and Bream and Williams, if you did name just three at mid-century, all sounded completely different when you heard them. And yet today, I could play three really great players and they sound, well, they would be different. They're much closer to each other than what we had back then. So I think I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. It's neither. It's just the way it is. But
overall, the prognosis is good.
I think so. Yeah. The downside is that I think, and this comes in waves, and I know you've seen it over the course of your career too, but we see in collegiate programs these peaks and valleys, and I think right now we're approaching a valley in terms of the number of students that are signing up for guitar programs or music programs in general. It's just, that's the way the world is going right now. People are finding other ways to make careers, and so they're not choosing music as often as they did, say, in the 1980s and 90s. But there will eventually be this too. At least it's always kind of been that way in the past. And so I'm assuming that if we're on a downward trend now, that at some point it'll rise back up and more people will become interested in it as a career.
Sounds good. So
who knows? Who knows?
Brad, thank you so much for agreeing to come
Oh,
on
of
the show
course.
again. I really, really appreciate this. I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you've enjoyed this, please tell your friends or send them a link. And I hope you'll come back real soon to Creative Conversations with Roger Humphrey.